there was a debate that went on, and the Indian master won this debate, and so the Tibetans decided that they would take Buddhism from India. Now, of course, there may have been some political considerations in this as well, because Tibet had just conquered the capital of China, and so it would be a little bit strange to accept the religious beliefs from the people they had conquered. But in any case, they took Buddhism and the written alphabet and so on from India, and there were many obstacles in Tibet at the time. There was a lot of black magical forces, spells, charms that were going on, and it was necessary to have a very strong type of force, strong use of powers to be able to overcome these obstacles, and this is what Padmasambhava was able to do. He was able to subdue the forces there and pave the road for Buddhism to come in. Now, the first tradition that we get in Tibet is known as the Nyingma tradition. That's the old tradition, and this flourished for a few centuries, and then there was a persecution. There was a persecution in Tibet, and Buddhism died down. It had to go underground, and a little bit like what has happened over the last 28 years in Tibet now, with its severe persecution, the persecution of Buddhism. So it went underground, particularly in eastern Tibet, and when this persecution passed, then the Tibetans had to get Buddhism again from India because it had died down a bit. They came back down to India, and they invited various masters back to Tibet, and we get the Sarma, or the new traditions, the new translation period traditions, and this would include the Kadampa, which later becomes the Galupa tradition, and the Sakya and the Kargyu. These basically are differing just in the sense of the new translation period has a new style with which they translate the text, and there'll be a slightly different approach in terms of working with the energy, subtle energies in the body. But basically it's the same set of teachings, and they come to Tibet through various lines. We have Atisha, who was a great Indian master who had gone to Sumatra to bring back some of the lineages from there to India, and he came to Tibet and started the Kadampa lineage, which split into three and then was reunified later on in the 15th century, 14th century actually, by Tsongkhapa, and this became the Galupa lineage. One of the disciples of the Tsongkhapa was posthumously recognized as the first Dalai Lama. The Dalai Lama, however, is not the head of the Galupa tradition. The Dalai Lama is the one who is, he's known as his Supreme Presence. He's the one who is the spiritual leader of all the different traditions of Buddhism in Tibet, and also starting from the time of the fifth Dalai Lama, he was the political ruler of Tibet as well. So he combined a position similar to the Pope and the King of Tibet. His teacher, the teacher of the fifth Dalai Lama, was the first Panchen Lama. We might have heard of the name of the Panchen Lama, and they traditionally have had the position of teacher and disciple to each other, depending on the age of each of them. At the present time, they're both pretty much the same age, and so they haven't had that relationship. So we get these type of figures. Then also we get the Sakya lineage, which comes from one Indian master called Virupa. It comes into Tibet. We get a line of 3 white masters and 2 red masters. The 3 white are the ones who wore white robes, which meant that they were not monks, and the 2 red wore red robes, and they were monks. As we saw, the Tibetan lineage of monastic ordination was a slightly different one from the Mula Sarvastivadin, one of the other of the 18 Hinayana schools. Now, sometimes it's a little bit confusing because we hear the names monk and lama and these sort of things, and it's important to keep in mind that a monk is somebody who has taken the vows of celibacy, not to marry, and so on, and that doesn't necessarily mean that they have any great high attainment. It's just somebody who's decided to give up. It's somebody who has decided to give up a home life. They may be going in the spiritual direction, but that doesn't end. Of course, we show them respect, but that doesn't mean that necessarily they have any realization or high attainment. Whereas a lama is not necessarily a monk. A lama is the Tibetan translation for the Indian word guru, and so it's a high spiritual teacher. And high spiritual teachers can be either householders or monks, can be either a man or a woman. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that a lama is a monk, but these are the great teachers. So monks aren't necessarily lamas, lamas aren't necessarily monks. Some of these lamas have reached the point where they're able to control their rebirth. Now, it's not necessary to become an arhat, to become a liberated being in order to control our rebirth. It's not necessary to become a Buddha to be able to do that. If we have a very strong bodhicitta, bodhicitta is our heart is set on reaching enlightenment. That means to not just overcome our own problems, which would be to gain liberation, become an arhat, but to overcome all our limitations and realize all our potential so that we can benefit others the best. And if we have our heart set on this goal, and our heart is expanding out to others more and more, and we have a great deal of practice on the first part of the fourth class of Tantra practices, which is gaining very excellent concentration and very excellent visualization abilities in terms of the process of death, the process of rebirth, and so on, then with that, it's enough to be able to direct our rebirths. And so there are about 1,000 lamas who have reached this stage, and they reincarnate in forms which are going to be found as small children, who then will have the best education, the best spiritual training, and continue to teach others. And so these are known as tulkus. Tulku is a reincarnate lama. Now, such tulkus are given a title, which is the title of Rinpoche. Rinpoche means a precious one. But as His Supreme Presence, the Dalai Lama, says, we shouldn't get superstitious about this. Just because somebody is a tulku doesn't mean that we should worship them and like that, but each of them has to prove by their own accomplishments, their own realizations, that they are in fact a lama and can teach. But in any case, they're given the title Rinpoche, which is the precious one, and that title is not limited just to these reincarnated lamas or teachers, but also abbots of monasteries get that name, that title as well. They're known as Rinpoche. Retired abbots get that title, and sometimes people will refer to their own teachers as Rinpoche out of respect. So although we have all these different titles, we shouldn't get too confused in the Tibetan tradition. Monks are not necessarily lamas. Lamas are teachers. Lamas are not necessarily monks. They could be lay people. Some of the lamas will be reincarnated lamas. They will be called a tulku, and they will have the title Rinpoche, but also abbots can have the title of Rinpoche as well. So, in the Sakya line, we get these three white masters who are lay persons, and the tradition in the Sakya is going to be passed on from father to son, or uncle to nephew. It's passed on in a family line. And the two red masters, one of them was known as Chogyal Pakpa, and he was the person who brought Buddhism to the Mongols. This was to the court of Kublai Khan, and so the Mongols then got a writing system, which was developed from the Tibetans, and they started following the Tibetan form of Buddhism. This then, when the Mongols conquered the rest of China, conquered the southern Sung dynasty, we get the Yuan dynasty of the Mongols, and now the Tibetan form of Buddhism starts to spread around in China, because we saw that the native forms of Buddhism started to go a little bit more underground and mixing with the Taoist and the Confucian ways of practice, especially when Buddhism lost imperial favor. So later on, that was in the Tang dynasty, later on in the Yuan dynasty, the Mongol dynasty, 13th, 14th centuries, again, Buddhism gets imperial patronage, this time the Tibetan form. Continues in China into the Ming dynasty, which was a native Chinese dynasty, as I'm sure most of you know. And during that dynasty, again, we get the emperors having tutors from the Tibetans, and the scriptures get the Tibetan canon, which is now translations of things which were, the full development of all the texts in India. They were all translated into Tibetan, and it's divided into two. We have the Kangyur, which are the translations of the Buddha's words, so that would include all the tantras as well, so it's a much larger collection than the Chinese one. And we get the Tengyur, which is the translation of all the Indian commentaries. When Buddhism died down in India after the Muslim invasions, then a lot of these texts were lost in their original Sanskrit and are only preserved in the Tibetan. So the Tibetan canon is the largest. Some things had already been lost in India when the Tibetans were translating, and so a few things like the Avatamsaka Sutra come from Chinese back into Tibetan. But in any case, the canon was translated into the Mongolian language, and later on, the next dynasty was the Qing dynasty, that's the Manchu dynasty, and there the texts start to be translated into the Manchu language as well. So we get the Tibetan form of Buddhism spreading throughout particularly North China and to all the areas where the Mongols and the Manchus lived, and into the Soviet Union, in the areas of Siberia and Turkestan where the Mongol people reside. Also Buddhism, the Tibetan form of Buddhism is found throughout the Himalayan regions, Nepal, Bhutan, Ladakh, and so on. So we have the Sakya lineage, that's the one that brought Buddhism to the Mongols, and we also get the Kagyu lineages. There are 13 Kagyus. The Sakya, by the way, divides into 3. The Kagyu lineages, basically we get 2 major groups of them. One has 12 traditions, and that's called the Dakpo Kagyu, and that comes from the line of Tilopa, Naropa, Marpa, Milarepa, Gampopa. They're quite famous names, particularly Milarepa. And Gampopa had 4 disciples. One of them, Pamotrupa, had 8 disciples, and it's from these 4 and 8 that we get the 12. One of these disciples was the first Karmapa, and so we get the Karma Kagyu. That's one of these lineages, but there are many other Kagyu lineages as well. The Drigung is one of them. The head of that was just here a few weeks ago. The Drukpa and the Daklong are the other major ones. Then, aside from these 12, there's one other lineage called the Shangpa Kagyu that comes from Kungpa Neljor, another Indian master, and Kalu Rinpoche, who I think also has been in this area, a very old Lama, is the head of that tradition. So we get many different traditions and various masters from each of these at different times. We're going to be the tutors of the emperor in China. So there's quite an interaction here. Now, all these various lineages in Tibetan Buddhism are going to have they all have the same monastic tradition. This Mula Sarvastivadin, that's one of these Hinayana traditions for the monks. They're all going to have both married practitioners and monk and nun practitioners. They're all going to have a great deal of emphasis on logic and debate because they have this inheritance from India of the debating tradition, and they're all going to do a great deal of meditation practice. Statistically, we might find in one tradition more practitioners putting emphasis on debate, more on isolated meditation, but we should never think that these are just the exclusive domain of one tradition or another. All of them follow an integrated path of all these practices, plus everybody practices Tantra and all four classes of Tantra. So basically we have about 85% of the material is the same. In the Tibetan traditions, there's just going to be slightly different ritualistic ways of doing things. This comes primarily because the monasteries were so far from each other. Communication and transportation was so difficult. And so even within one tradition, there's not going to be uniformity, but we're going to get many, many different styles of doing the rituals. Also, the language is going to be slightly different. The vocabulary is going to be different in some of these traditions, but even within one, we're going to get many sets of commentaries which are slightly different. Some people think that the Tibetans have added a great deal onto Indian Buddhism, and often that's based on thinking that the Indian Buddhism didn't have all sorts of rituals or protectors or tantric type of things, and that's not the case because we have Tantrayana still surviving in Sanskrit among the Nawaris in Nepal, and we find all these features there in the original Sanskrit tradition as well. So when we asked what have the Tibetans contributed to the Buddhism from India, it's the major thing, the most outstanding thing, is a system of outlines, a way of organizing all the various Buddhist scriptures and all the commentaries from India. They've divided them into very systematic outlines, which make them much easier to study and to have them organized in a way that we can approach them more easily. Tibetans are very logical, very organized type of people in their approach to the Buddhist study. It's done in a very systematic type of way. In India, the Buddha taught various levels of explanation of reality. So we get the Indian schools of Buddhist philosophy, the tenets. These are known as, in the Sanskrit language, we have the Vaibhashika, the Sautrantika, Chittamatran, and Madhyamaka. Madhyamaka being divided into Svatantrika and Prasangika. Those are just names. If you've never heard of them, it doesn't matter. But the point is that the Buddha taught a system of narrowing in on the truth. If we want to understand something, well, you don't teach somebody the most sophisticated explanation first. It's like if we study physics, first we would study Newtonian physics. When we've gotten that, then we would say, but if you want to refine that a little bit more, then you would have to study relativity. So the same thing in the discussion of reality. Buddha first described things in a general way. When people understood that, then he would say, well, but it's not quite exactly like that. He would narrow in a little bit closer. Then when you got that, then, well, it's not quite that way either, and you have to refine it a little bit more. And in this way, we narrow in on the truth. And although different Indian masters, even though different great Indian Buddhist masters will specialize in one or another of these systems and write commentaries according to one or another of these systems, everybody would agree that the Prasangika was the most sophisticated explanation. Now, the Chinese schools got one or another of these systems of explanation, and it hadn't been all organized very well together when the Chinese got Buddhism, and so there are some minor schools that developed in China that followed either one or another of these points of view. But in the Tibetan case, it was all very well organized by the time the Tibetans got it, and so all the Tibetan traditions accept the Prasangika point of view, and will teach all the various other tenet systems as a way to come closer and closer and narrowing in on the most refined way of understanding reality. So how do the different Tibetan Buddhist systems differ? They differ in terms of, on the deepest level, what we want to follow is a combined path. The modest-minded teachings, the Hinayana teachings, are going to give all the methods for being able to gain concentration, discipline, ethical self-discipline, for understanding the absence of fantasized ways of existing with respect to ourself. Now, and that's obviously going to allow us to become liberated from our problems. It works. Nobody ever denies that. In the Mahayana system, they say that this understanding of reality, which we get in the Hinayana systems, that's true, it's correct, but what we need is a little bit more energy behind it for it to be able to cut through all the levels of obscurations, not just our own disturbing attitudes that cause us our problems, but also we have to be able to overcome our projections, all these sort of things which limits our ability to see others the way that they are and to help them the best. And so the Mahayana is going to keep all the Hinayana type of training and add to it the practices of bodhicitta, of expanding our heart to others. All the traditions, both the Theravada and all the Mahayana traditions, including Vajrayana, which is part of the Mahayana, is going to have compassion and love. If it's a Buddhist teaching, it has compassion and love. Metta meditation is very prominent in the Theravadin traditions. So wishing others to be happy is love, and compassion is the wish for others to be free from their problems. The Mahayana goes one step further, and we take some universal responsibility to actually try to help others in a very active way to overcome their problems, because even though when the Buddha said in the Theravada, in the Hinayana teachings, that basically everybody has to do it for themselves, that's true. We all do have to do it for ourselves. Nobody can hand Buddhahood to somebody else on a platter. Buddha can't pull out others' problems like pulling out a splinter from somebody's foot, but nevertheless, there is something that we can do to help others along the way, and so in the Mahayana, we take universal responsibility to try to help others, not just wish them well, but to actually do something. And then what we do is we realize that, well, I'm not in any great position to be able to help others now. The only way that I will be is if I overcome all my limitations, realize all my potentials. In other words, if I become a Buddha, then I can truly help others the best. And so we develop bodhicitta, which is our heart set on this goal of reaching enlightenment to be able to benefit others. And then the practice is to work actively helping others, expanding our heart out more and more to others, and to reaching this goal in order to be able to help them. And so we follow far-reaching attitudes that's sometimes called the perfections of being a very giving person, being generous, having ethical self-discipline, patient tolerance, positive enthusiasm, constancy of mind, and wisdom or discriminating awareness. So the Mahayana path puts great emphasis on developing the same wisdom as we had in the Hinayana, but having this heart set on reaching enlightenment to be able to help others the best, then we get more energy behind it so that it can cut through the obstacles more fully, so we can actually become a Buddha and help others the best. The example is that if there's a class in a medical school in which they're teaching how to cure a poisonous snake bite, if there's a medical student whose only motivation is to overcome their poverty and become a wealthy doctor, then they'll listen to this explanation with a certain amount of energy, and they'll learn it so that they can pass the examination and become a wealthy doctor. But if there's a mother whose child was just bitten by a poisonous snake, and they run into that classroom to learn how to cure that poisonous snake bite, then they're going to have much more energy to learn how to do that, because they have to learn how to cure it because their baby has just been bitten. So likewise, if we have our heart expanding out to all others with the equal concern as we would have toward our own baby, and we have to then achieve enlightenment. We have to overcome all our limitations, realize all our potentials in order to help everybody. So that gives more energy behind this understanding of reality, so that it cuts through more obscurations and we can actually become a Buddha, not just liberated as an Arhat. Tantrayana is going to add further in this direction. It's, again, the same type of goal as Mahayana. It's a Mahayana teaching, but it's saying that it's going to take too long to do this by our ordinary methods. Therefore, how can we do this more efficiently? We want to achieve both the body and mind of a Buddha, and so what we can do is use the powers of the imagination. Tantra is involved very much with the imagination. We have all these various deities. These are forms that a Buddha appears in, and that we can work with in order to achieve the causes for the body of a Buddha more quickly. So what we want to do is try to do something like a rehearsal now. If we want to become a Buddha more quickly, it's like if we want to dance in a ballet, we would do a dress rehearsal. That would be the thing that would get us to be able to dance the ballet most quickly. Obviously, we have to learn how to dance first, so we have to learn concentration, wisdom, and so on. But the dress rehearsal is going to get us to the performance more quickly. So likewise, we practice now. We imagine that I already have the body of a Buddha that's with the deity forms, and that my environment is like that of a Buddha. I'm able to enjoy things without confusion the way a Buddha does, and I'm able to help others the way that a Buddha does by exerting an enlightening positive influence on everyone around me. So each of these deities is going to be concerned with a certain self-image. We normally have a very negative self-image of ourselves. I'm shy, I can't help others, or I'm stupid, or I'm God's gift to the world, or whatever. And the Tantra method is like a mental judo. Instead of trying to block that tendency of the mind to project a self-image, then why not just project a positive one rather than a negative one? So each of these deities has a positive self-image, like Guanyin. It's the Chinese name for Avalokiteshvara, is the self-image of being very warm, kind, and compassionate. So rather than feeling that I'm shy, I can't help others, when we imagine that we're Guanyin, we imagine that we actually can help others, we actually have warmth, compassion. So it's not a matter of just worshiping some deity like a god, but we show respect to what we want to achieve, and basically we transform ourselves into Guanyin in order to use this as a method for developing more compassion and love for others. Now, when we work like this, you see, what we really want to get to is the subtlest level of consciousness, because we have many levels of consciousness, and the subtlest level is like a laser beam. And if we can get down to that laser beam mind by channelizing all the various energies in the body, centralizing them, getting them down more and more refined, then we can get to this laser beam level and use that for gaining the understanding of reality. Then we can get to this laser beam level and use that for gaining the understanding of reality. This is based on gaining shamatha or samatha in the Pali tradition, the Pali language, I mean, which is a serenely stilled and settled state of mind, so perfect concentration, and to get an exceptionally perceptive state of mind that can see into reality, to gain the understanding of this absence of fantasized ways of existing. But we want to go further in terms of getting down to these subtler levels of energy, and with these subtler levels of energy, get to the laser beam level. Out of that laser beam mind, make the mind of a Buddha, and out of that energy of the laser beam mind, make the body of a Buddha. In the Zen, in these Tibetan traditions, we're going to have various types of meditation, like Mahamudra. Mahamudra is the great seal nature of the mind, and here, in the Vipassana technique, in the Theravadin, we were being a little bit like, if the mind is like a torch or a flashlight, we are a little bit like the person behind the flashlight, just detaching ourselves from what's happening, what's arising, and just observing, seeing that it all is momentary. In the Mahamudra technique, what we want to do is focus on being the flashlight or the torch itself, and just to focus how on each moment all we have is clarity and awareness. It's clarity and awareness of an object, of objects arising, and an awareness or an involvement with it. So it's a slightly different way of doing the meditation, but we can see it's very similar for focusing on the nature of the mind and letting go from each moment to moment, so that as the flashlight we illuminate everything that occurs, go on from moment to moment, and in this way, when we get to that nature of the mind, it allows us, through other techniques, to get to the more subtle level of the mind. There's the Dzogchen technique, the Great Completeness technique, which is taught in the Nyingma tradition, and that is to, again, we want to achieve Vipassana, this exceptionally perceptive state of mind, and here the technique would be, for instance, to observe thoughts, and in the this technique, to see that thoughts arise and fall simultaneously, like writing on water. And so when you write on water, as you write, it disappears at the same time, so the same thing with thoughts, and that again is going to allow us to see things arising and falling, which was what we were doing in the Vipassana technique in the Theravadin, but by seeing it arise and fall simultaneously, we can get to the space underneath, this more laser beam level from which things are arising, so that again we get down to the subtle level that we can use for gaining the most profound understanding of reality. In the Zen tradition, in the Chinese traditions, like the Pure Land, as I was saying, what we want to do is be reborn in a pure land. Now, although we can pray and perhaps go there, really the way to be able to go there is to get down to this subtle level of energy, and to get down to the subtlest level of energy, and with that energy go to this pure land. But in any case, the point is to get to this pure land where things are going to be more conducive for being able to gain all the realizations more quickly. So it's not contradictory, it's just trying to get to a place where it's going to happen more easily. But there to follow those techniques. The Zen tradition, we're going to have, remember we wanted to achieve the body and the mind of a Buddha. So in Zen, we sit in the perfect posture, it's Zen, and just as in the Tantrayana, in the Tibetan tradition, we focus on having the body of a deity as a method for achieving that body. In the Zen tradition, by focusing on the posture and having the body in that posture with all the energies flowing in the right way, that acts as a cause for achieving the body of a Buddha, so it functions the same. We want to we do the breathing practices in Zen or Chan Buddhism, breathing from the navel center and focusing on the breath there. A lot of things are done similar to that in the martial arts as well. Again, that's going to function similar to in the Vajrayana system of working with the energies to centralize them. That's done mostly through the navel center. And so by focusing on the breathing through the navel center in the Chan and Zen traditions, it accomplishes the same thing. It gets the energies focused there so that they can become more concentrated, dissolve, get down to these more subtle levels. Then we have the koan practice in Zen, which is to ask various questions. In the Japanese tradition, we go on from one to another. In the Korean tradition, for instance, we ask just one question, one koan, what is it? And the point is not to come up with an answer, but to develop the exceptionally perceptive state of mind, which is always asking. Is always asking and perceiving, what is it, and that likewise is going to accomplish the same thing as we did in the Vipassana technique in the Theravadin, to see with an exceptionally perceptive state of mind each moment arising, or in the Tibetan traditions, to see each moment as the appearance of the mind, or thoughts arising and falling simultaneously, and so on. We get to the same state of mind that can see reality, and in this way make the causes for the mind of a Buddha. So if we look in terms of these type of approaches, we can see that all the various teachings here are different skillful means that the Buddha gave in order to bring people to a goal of either liberation from their own problems, or the goal of overcoming all their limitations, realizing all their potential so that they can benefit everyone, which is enlightenment. That's the goal in Mahayana, including the Vajrayana. And the Buddha said that people are different, dispositions are different, therefore it's very important not to be dogmatic, but to have a wide variety of techniques as skillful means to suit different people, different cultures, different situations in their own life. So if we understand like this, then we'll see that all the traditions of Buddhism are in harmony, they all equally derive from the Buddha, and all are aimed at bringing happiness and the welfare of everyone. Any questions? Well, I think from what I had heard, it was among the Chinese scholars that, remember we had the 18 schools of Hinayana. Now, these 18 schools, the teachings of the Buddha, particularly referring to lineages of the rules of discipline, or Vinaya, there was no general name for all of them. And so, as far as I know, I mean, this is, as I say, I'm not absolutely positive on this. That's why I said that I can't give a definitive answer. But from what I believe, from what I've studied, is that the term Hinayana was coined in China, and then, referred back to an Indian term, to refer to those 18 schools altogether, because they needed to have a general term for the 18, whereas originally there was nothing other than the 18 in a written form, therefore they didn't need a general term for them. That's a very good question. There's so many schools of Buddhism, and how are we to choose? I suppose the thing is to study and to get some sort of taste of the various major ones, the ones that are available to us, and based on our own experience, see what actually suits us the best. It can only be based on an educated understanding. If we see a lot of food in a restaurant, well, how do we know which we like? All we can do is, try one, and then another time we try another, and after a while we discover what suits us. Because I think that's a really great, outstanding feature in Buddhism, that it's not dogmatic. It's not saying that there's only one path, one truth, and that's it. Everybody has to do it. We can also see instinctively which are the forms that we're drawn to, and those might be quite different from the forms that our parents, for instance, follow. Just because we were born in a family which might have been a Buddhist family, like many people in this country, that doesn't mean that necessarily that form of Buddhism or their parents' understanding of Buddhism is the one that they themselves are going to feel drawn to. Many people in the West are drawn to Eastern religions and philosophies. Many people in the East are drawn to Western ones. That's only natural. especially when we think of previous lives, then we have some explanation. The question is the Om Mani Padme Hum the most powerful and effective mantra among the Tibetans? Now, Om Mani Padme Hum is the mantra of Avalokiteshvara in Sanskrit, that's Guanyin in Chinese, and this is the most widely practiced deity, the most widely practiced mantra. Whether it's the most effective or not, that also is, you can't really say, because all of them are effective. It's a matter of, this is the safest one. I mean, this is what my own teacher, for instance, explained. He said that if you're practicing mantras in terms of gaining wisdom, then you might have a little bit of pride about being so smart. Or if you're practicing ones in terms of powerful abilities, then you might, to gain confidence, you might go a little bit overboard and become a little bit on a power trip. But if all day long we're focusing on Om Mani Padme Hum and compassion, then there's no danger with that, because our hearts are always set then on love, on kind feelings towards others and helping others. And so this is the standard basic thing that is encouraged in the Tibetan traditions, all four traditions of Tibetan Buddhism, to have as a constant thing in our minds, this thought of compassion and love for others, which saying the mantra keeps us mindful of. And also, you see, a mantra is etymologized as protecting the mind, man for manas and tra to protect. And so it protects the mind in the sense that our mind normally would be filled with all sorts of worries, anxieties, strange thoughts, and so on. But if we have a mantra going, then it protects against the danger of just having garbage going through our mind, and to have instead a steady vibration and thoughts of kindness, warmth, and love towards others. Guanyin is the Chinese translation of Avalokiteshvara. Avalokiteshvara is the incarnation of compassion. Guanyin is just the Chinese translation. That's exactly true. Mahayana is divided into Sutrayana and Tantrayana. The Tantrayana is a continuation of Sutrayana. They're not contradictory. Sutrayana is the basic path of developing, it's also called the perfection vehicle, or Paramitayana. And so the Tibetans have organized it. Well, actually, it came from India, from a great master called Atisha. It was organized into the graded stages of the path. In Tibetan, that's known as Lam Rim. It's followed in all the four Tibetan traditions. And so it's the graded stages, the Sutrayana path, of developing concentration, having a safe direction in life, of refuge, cause and effect, teachings on karma, teachings on ethics, morality, all the teachings on developing wisdom to see reality or voidness, the absence of fantasized ways of existing, all the teachings on love, compassion, how to expand our heart out to all others. So there's a graded path of that, and that covers the Sutrayana path. Tantrayana includes all of that, absolutely everything in that, and goes further on the basis of all of that, then how to work with the powers of the imagination to change our self-image, work with the self-image, and use that for being able to get into the subtle energy systems, working with that to get to the subtlest level of these, the laser beam level, so that we can gain the fastest understanding of reality and make the causes for the body of a Buddha. So it forms a continuum. Does that mean that through Sutrayana we cannot attain Buddhahood? No, that's not the case, but it will take much longer through Sutrayana. Tantrayana, we can do it more efficiently. Why did Buddhism fail to spread to Europe? Well, historically it seems to be doing that now. It seems to be spreading to Europe. So it's a matter of when the times are ripe, the situations are there, and people are receptive. Just as in China, it only was able to spread to China when China was in a state of great disruption at the fall of the Han Dynasty. We have the warrings, the three kingdoms and six dynasties period. Then the old values were being questioned, and then they were open to new suggestions. Now, I think that's China is a much better example than Tibet for the West, because China had a very fully developed philosophical systems and culture and so on when Buddhism came in, and it had to wait for the right moment when the people were questioning the old values so that they would turn to look to new ideas. Because in Tibet, Tibet didn't really have a very developed system of philosophy or a written system or anything like that when Buddhism came there, so the analogy is not quite the same. So now in the West, in the past, things have been more stable, but now when people are questioning the old values, questioning the forms of the past religions and so on, and it seems as though there's a threat of chaos like we had at the end of the Han Dynasty, then people in the West are much more receptive to looking to alternative philosophies, alternative religions to give solutions, so they're more open-minded. So I think it's a matter of a historical approach of trying to see what are the historical forces which would allow for Buddhism to come into a civilization, particularly one in which there's a very well-established philosophy. Nichiren is one of the Japanese schools, and this is taking on a very strong Japanese flavor. In Japan, there's a tradition. I mean, as I was trying to point out in my survey of the history, Buddhism has adopted itself to various different countries and taught in skillful means which will be in accordance with the way of thinking of certain people in that area. And so the Nichiren is one of the Japanese schools which has a very strong Japanese flavor in terms of Japanese has political implications in terms of the ruler and these sort of things. So it's a form of Buddhism, particularly that developed in Japan during a period when there was a great concern over politics. The Lord Buddha appeared in another form in Japan. Yes, well, in many of the traditions, they say that Buddha appeared in different forms, different manifestations to help at different times. So Buddha can appear as Guru Shakyamuni and so on. You see, there's a different concept of the Buddha in the, let's say, the Theravadin tradition and the Mahayana tradition. In the Theravadin tradition, we speak just of the historical Buddha in terms of like 1,000 Buddhas, and the historical Buddha was the fourth. In the Mahayana tradition, we speak of there being countless Buddhas, and the historical Buddhas are manifestations of emanations of an enlightened mind. There are many mind streams, enlightened beings, and they can manifest and appear in many different times, many different places in order to teach others. And so there are many other emanations of Buddhas who have appeared, like Padmasambhava, or the founder of the Nichiren movement, in order to help guide people at that time. So there's no contradiction. The question is, what is a Rinpoche, and the difference between a Rinpoche and the Dalai Lama? A Rinpoche, as I explained, is a title of respect. It means a precious one, and it's given to either reincarnated lamas, who are known as tulkus, a lama being a high teacher, high spiritual teacher, or it can also be given as a title to the abbots of monasteries. Now, the Dalai Lama is, one, he's a lama, so he's a great spiritual teacher. Two, he's a monk, so he's celibate. And three, he's a tulku, so he's a reincarnated lama. And so he would be given the title Rinpoche, and he's known, one of his titles is Gyalwa Rinpoche, one title of a Rinpoche, but he is the highest of all of them. So he's the one who is the spiritual leader of all of Tibet, of all the traditions of Buddhism. Underneath him you have all the various His Holinesses, or the heads of the different traditions, and also from the time of the fifth Dalai Lama, he's been the political leader of Tibet, so the king as well. So he has a position which is a combination, a little bit of like being a pope and being a king. The question is, we've been talking about, I've been making reference to getting the energy centralized, getting down to the laser beam level of mind, so that we can use that. And the question is, does that enable us to get more closer than to nirvana? Yes, not only nirvana, but more specifically for enlightenment. Enlightenment is overcoming all the limitations, realizing all the potential so we can help others the best. Because this subtlest level of mind, I mean, I didn't go into it in so much detail because I already spoke for an hour and 45 minutes, but there's many, many advantages to getting to this level of mind because it's more subtle than the conceptual level. So we always are aiming for a non-conceptual understanding of reality, and if we're doing it on the level of the ordinary levels of the mind, it's like having a rabbit inside a fence with the foxes outside. We can get to the non-conceptual state, but we're at the same level as the conceptual thoughts, and so they're like the foxes around, or the wolves outside the fence, and they could always come in and attack. Whereas if that rabbit goes down in a hole in the ground, then the wolves can't get to it. So if we can go down to the subtlest level, which is more subtle than the conceptual level, or the level at which concepts function, then we have no danger of it becoming becoming conceptual. And so like that, there are many advantages to this subtlest laser beam mind that in the usual methods it would take so long to get a non-conceptual understanding. Here, if we can get down to that laser beam level, automatically it's non-conceptual because that level is non-conceptual. It's more subtle than the conceptual level. So like that, there are many, many advantages. In the Tibetan tradition, is reincarnation the same as rebirth? And you see, I don't know what the connotation for a lot of people is in terms of what the word reincarnation means or what the word rebirth means and what the difference is between the two. They just talk about the beginningless and endless continuity of the mind stream. And so that continues, whether you call that rebirth, reincarnation, or whatever. It's just a name. The question is there any mention in the Tibetan tradition of Bodhidharma? Now, I haven't come across any mention in the lineages of Bodhidharma, but I'm not familiar with all the lists of names of all the different lineages. Bodhidharma came to China much earlier than when Buddhism went to Tibet, and he's coming from, well, actually I don't know the specific source of his lineage within Tibet, within India, but even though there's no mention of him in the Tibetan scriptures, not scriptures, but the Tibetan lineages, I wouldn't expect to find a mention of him. Why should there be? What is Tantra? The word Tantra means an everlasting stream of continuity. And so there's a basis, path, and resultant level of that. The basis level is the everlasting stream of continuity of the mind stream. The path level is the everlasting stream of continuity of these practices with these deities or Buddha forms to produce a body of a Buddha. And the resultant level is the everlasting stream of continuity of the different bodies of a Buddha that we achieve when becoming enlightened. And so all of these are referred to as Tantra. And then there's also the texts which speak about them. They're also called Tantra. And this is the subject matter, and we also have the texts that refer to them. And yes, these come from India, and these were taught by the Buddha in various manifestation forms, according to the Mahayana concept of what a Buddha is. And their lineages were passed on orally. They weren't written down until much later. And then they get written. They were written in India, in various Indian languages, primarily Sanskrit. The question is, do all the various Tibetan groups acknowledge the Dalai Lama as the spiritual head? And yes, the Dalai Lama by all means is accepted by everybody as the leader of Tibet, the one who in many ways, especially now, represents and is Tibet, in the sense that all the hopes of the Tibetan people for being able to gain the right of self-determination, to gain freedom of their own country, and the freedom to practice their own religion is all centered around the efforts of the Dalai Lama, because he's the one now who is recognized on an international level as the spiritual leader, as someone who now goes quite frequently to the Vatican, speaks with the Pope, speaks with leaders of all the various world religions, and not only is representing Tibetan Buddhism, but is gaining a position in which he can be a spokesman for all of Buddhism.
On behalf of the BGF, I would like to thank Dr. Alexandra again for his presence here tonight in giving us the talk. And to show our appreciation, let us fold our palms and say sadhu 3 times. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.